Good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to Customer Value and Beyond. I'm very happy to welcome you to another episode of our show. And today I'm very proud to have Stefan with me, SVP of Engineering at SAP Signavio, who will support me in moderating and hosting the session. And we're very proud to welcome Max Elster, CEO and founder of Minoa, to this round. And without further ado, because we were a bit delayed, Max, welcome, and maybe tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and why everybody should be even more excited to have you here with us today.
Good to see you guys again. I mean, last time we saw each other in person in Berlin, right? This time remote in like very different places of the world, I think. Unless you're in San Francisco, which I should know then, but I guess you are not. Yeah, so
Sadly
Max,
not.
sadly not. Next time. So Max, one of the co-founders of Minoa, together with Richard, started the company roughly, I think it's been 2.5 years now, where ultimately we came onto the mission back then that we saw that probably a lot of the people listening or watching this are currently seeing that in AI, but also before, there's just more and more software vendors that are getting built, more and more software that's getting released to the world. The question is, how do you truly differentiate yourself in a world where there's just an abundance of software, and ultimately it leads back to customer value, right? Truly helping your customer understand how you differentiate by the value you're providing. And we saw that there's a big gap in terms of how pre-sales teams, so BDRs, SDRs, AEs, and then SEs, but also post-sales teams, customer success managers, account managers, struggle to really pin down what's the unique customer value we're providing for a segment, for a persona, and we're solving that. And we call it customer value intelligence because we believe that some of that process can be automated. We can truly help people in automating some of those workflows, and that's why we're here. And yeah, of course, couldn't be a better group than to talk about the topic with you too.
All right, Steven.
Perfect. Thank you, Max. I think that's just a great start already. And I think that's also how we connected, right? I remember when Fabian Tausch from Unicorn Bakery brought us together because he said, hey, you seem to be talking about customer value, and Steven did something with customer success, so it might make sense to talk. I think it's been over a year now. So yeah, wonderful to have met you through that way, and to have you with us today. So maybe maybe say a few sentences about how did you actually get to the understanding that the whole value part, the value selling part, was the route to go down? Because we've all collected a lot of experience about what works and what doesn't work in go-to-market sales, solution engineering, and probably customer success. Which led us here. So what was for you like the key moment where you thought, okay, this is the route to go towards?
I mean, it's interesting whether it's like multiple different moments that have led to a decision to start a company in the space, right? Or whether it's kind of one unique decision. I think ultimately when I was at a Series B company before, I was a product manager working on new products. So probably for everybody that has seen organizations launch new products, it's usually always a big effort and a big hassle to get it to the go-to-market team. Not because the go-to-market fellows are actually not picking up the right way, but more they have usually been used to a single product. It works well. They generate a significant amount of revenue with that product. And the question is, how do you help a go-to-market team, whether it's a pre-sales seller, for example, or whether it's an account manager that works to upsell and expand with the customers, to understand what are the additional functionalities that we can now deliver, but how do we package it in a way that focuses on the outcomes that our customers could receive with that? And I was just seeing that as I was partly responsible for getting this new product out, it was actually not that easy to get it to the go-to-market people. And I had to find a way to remove myself from the features that we are building within the product team to use cases, to functionality, to value, and really think about how do we package it in a way that every seller can now start to pick it up and run to existing and new customers and talk about more than just a single product, but talk about a platform. And I think that's kind of definitely one of those unique moments that I think opened my eyes, where we also started our initial hypothesis to venture into this endeavor of thinking more about outcomes and value and customer value. Ultimately, I think if I look at the last like 2.5 years, there were multiple like moments that reinforced that thinking. One of them being that we saw that in a world of AI, there's just much more information out there that we can leverage, which is going to make customer value not necessarily easier, but I think more approachable. because you basically, for every single company that you're targeting, you can learn a lot about them before you even start talking about them. And there's much more information that you can basically analyze and uncover about your internal value prop, right? And if you think about all the different resources that exist and really thinking about, ultimately, it's about understanding a customer and then mapping it to your unique capabilities that differentiate you. And that's something that AI can partly automate, or at least augment in the sales process. So I think there were multiple of these moments that I think created this belief that there is a larger opportunity, not just about scaling value selling, which I think is something that a lot of organizations have been talking about, but it's more about what are the technology shifts combined with an overall market change with so many vendors that are out there, where every vendor now has to almost live in a red ocean and they have to kind of fight against the competition. And customer value is what ultimately delivers a CFO a narrative that actually they are going to convince by, right? And they're going to release budgets from. And I think that's kind of what really triggered a lot of the different moments. And of course, it's an evolving field, right? I don't think the signals are ever stopping. I think there are new signals every week that help to further encourage us on this larger vision of really going down to the why of why customers are actually buying.
Yeah, great stuff. I think you're preaching to the choir here.
That's right.
When you look at this scaling of the value selling, as you've said, what are the main value drivers that you yourself for Minora use when you pitch to a CEO, CFO, CSO? So what is in the end the convincing piece that helps you to land your deals?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, of course, like for a team of that we are, right, that's basically below 20, I think we're in a different stage where that we are so close to each other that's much harder to scale individual narratives and individual use cases across the team. Everybody knows the problems we're solving. I think when you talk about companies that are often hundreds, if not thousands or 10,000s of employees, where they have to find almost like a codified narrative of how should we all speak about the value we deliver on a platform level, on a product level, right? And it gets more complicated the further the bigger you get and the further you get along your cycle of building a company. I think for us, I mean, you know, I wouldn't necessarily that's representative of how I would recommend a 1,000-person organization should do it, but I think we always come together every single week and we look at the individual outcomes that we deliver to customers, and we try to have individual check-ins with customers to truly see where's the value being delivered, where can we potentially find additional use cases to explore. And of course, in a small startup, there's so many things happening that there's a constant set of new outcomes and use cases that we're presenting to customers, less about actually having full-fledged perfect use cases that have been tested out in the market, but more individual explorations of new ideas that we have where we believe there's a use case that could actually solve a problem. We go to the customer, we always mutually explore it with them as we go about the journey. I would speak very differently about a company. I mean, we work with, of course, a few companies in the Bay Area, but then also in Germany. Personio is one of our customers in Europe, but also we have companies here, Vanta, Pendo, and a few others that are well known in the tech industry. And some of those organizations have a couple thousand employees, right? So it's really thinking about how do they enable everybody internally to have almost like a central value hub that gives them the chance to explore for individual personas, for personas within a specific industry. Where can we deliver unique value? How do we differentiate against the competition? And how do we make sure that we can involve a champion on the customer side to be involved in that process, right? Because who's going to speak to the CFO? It's usually not the seller. Yes, there might be some scenarios where that might happen, but mostly it's an internal buying group. They have some sort of a charge. They go up to the CFO and they present it. I remember I did an internship at DHL way back like 10 years ago. And I was part of the corporate strategy team. And there, the corporate strategy leader, once a week, he got a little set of papers, different documents on his table that he basically had to review and say, sign off, decline, approve. And it was like basically just a binary decision, right? Approve or continue or decline. And that's kind of what happens, right? There's an internal team that gives it to him. The vendor is not in the room. So which information is being presented that the CFO says, approve, let's move ahead. And that's very much comes down to how do you present the unique value that you deliver over your competition in that instance, or against often status quo and not doing anything, right? That's often the bigger issue.
And if you have to think about like one or two recurring metrics that are in these cases, So I would assume revenue is one of them, right? Like additional revenue that the sales team could deliver, adopting value selling more. Is there another one, or maybe one too?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think, of course, I think in the world of like value, you talk about like three different things. Either you drive revenue, you reduce cost, or you mitigate risks, right? And I think it's, if you put it into those three buckets, it's very easy to comprehend. We've actually, and of course, that's kind of the interesting part about Minoa, we track all the different outcome plans and value plans and business cases that are created in the platform. And we recently ran an analysis, I think, Stephen, you also saw online, where we looked at what are the different like how can we categorize the different outcome plans and business cases that are built in our platform. And what we've noticed is that over half of all the individual use cases that are presented to customers these days focus on cost reduction, which I think makes sense in a larger scheme of AI, right? Where a lot of vendors are talking about efficiency gains, reducing cost, potentially helping you to not hire more people, right? And find internal value drivers and efficiencies within your organization, and essentially enable employees to do a more productive job by using AI agents or AI workflows. And I think that's, of course, could be one of the reasons why we have that data, that we just generally see that more of the conversations happen around costs. But I think it's a pendulum, right? I think ultimately when that kind of has been manifested, I think we will also look into probably more use cases that are delivered towards revenue increase. And I think it's just a matter of time until that happens. I think right now there's just a lot of opportunity to follow a PE or venture case narrative, or in Fortune 500, they're all trying to make their organizations more productive, right? So cost efficiency is probably a big theme that vendors try to associate themselves with. That might change though. I think it's just, and I'm happy to maybe we can do this again in 6 months and see if the data changes, but that's the latest at least.
Let's do that. All right.
Booked. That's a great answer. And how I would like to like bucket it also is a bit of an understanding, like value. There's always value engineering, right? There's some kind of value realization, and probably something like value management, maybe, right? Or realization management could also be combined, probably. And what we've seen so far, right, is that the value engineering piece, in an ideal situation, you would have a very strong AE, probably a seller who understands value selling quite well, right? Probably in a larger setting, supported by a solution engineer and pre-sales engineer, something like that. And then the whole realization piece in the end, probably more on the customer success services side. But this is usually in larger organizations, right? If you look, Stefan probably can confirm that if you look into larger organizations, you see these teams, right? You have the value engineering teams, you have the value advisors, you have the value selling teams, right? You have all that combined. Where's probably the challenge you have seen in especially start scale-ups who try to adopt that? Where's probably a challenge in getting to that point where you don't have the budget, personnel, or focus to just create a team doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, as you said, right, I think some of the most successful, if not all of the most successful enterprise organizations within software, they have at least adopted some way or the other of value engineering, right? It's SAP, Oracle, it's Databricks, right? Snowflake, right? So all those companies have internal value engineering teams, but it also kind of makes sense, right? They have they see a lot of value in like huge multi-million-dollar enterprise deals. That's kind of where basically their margins come from. Down market, everything that's kind of commercial, mid-market, or just like regular enterprise, not strategic or large enterprise, you just see that organizations are looking for a solution because they kind of want to follow the same practices as the big ones do, but they, as you said, often can't afford, or at least like a big team, right? They maybe have 1 or 2 value engineers, if at all, and they're trying to somewhat codify a system that can scale across the company. What are the core challenges that we're seeing? I think one is, first of all, getting everybody kind of aligned on a new principle, right? Even though I think ultimately everybody agrees to focus on value, I think sometimes it means different things in different teams, right? From maybe a pre-sales team to post-sales team, they have to get aligned of, do we even feel sure that the use case we are providing to customers, we can also realize them and we can measure whether we're successful. That's something where I think, Stephen, you probably have a lot of interesting insights from your CS background. I think a lot of customer success teams, they're worried that value realization like mode will actually lead to kind of customers seeing that there is no value. I often come from a different perspective, and you see that great companies do it. If the customer will anyways churn if you don't deliver value, if you can pinpoint it early enough that there's delivery gaps and you try to solve them together, you probably just secure a renewal later. But that's something that I think just general alignment is important. And I think internally, one of the things that we're noticing a little bit more is that ownership starts to happen around value in individual groups. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, I think there was a little bit of a big question mark of like who should potentially own this. I think now we see a little bit of a change where sales leaders, yes, they anyways want to see this happening and scale. Sales engineering teams become interesting if there's no value team. They want to become more influential in a company, right? They've always been seen as kind of this demo team that sits on the side and creates demos. I don't think that's actually their value. They're often very technical, but they are business savvy. They like talking business and commercials. So why not have them kind of codify and use AI to like find more ways to standardize some of those processes? And then product marketing is similar to the sales engineering role, in my opinion, where in the past, like I hired one of the product marketers at the previous company, and I've always admired them because they have an interest for language and positioning, but they also understand the product and they talk to customers, right? So they can also like be part of that process. I think it's just about having them kind of see the opportunity of owning this and like basically being so influential in a company that they can have a role if there's no value team, right? I think if there's a value team, companies are usually well suited and they can kind of run with the process, and they can find ways to scale.
And I love that you mentioned product marketing as well, because I think there was, especially for the probably last decade, there was a big gap between where product marketing and probably sales, especially when you conducted value selling, had an understanding of like the ROI, right? Let's just call it ROI in terms of value. And then there was the post-sales side of things, usually customer success teams, where, well, still there are a lot of standardizations missing, right? There's no norm for what we call customer success and what that is, and oftentimes was focused on internal metrics, right? So it wasn't necessarily about, I understand that my customer is driving a certain business outcome. It was more about, okay, I have to increase adoption. I have to get all these seats that we sold, right? I have to put users on that, right. And I have to increase the adoption, right? And in many cases, I also saw that there probably wasn't even 100% clear what good adoption might look like, right? So, and where have you seen this change happen, that there seems to be an overall organizational understanding that it's about the true customer value, right? That's about the outcome for the customers. And I don't know, was there a necessity or a trigger where you think that actually came to mind?
I think it's almost like we're moving into different phases, right? I think like a few years ago, everybody talked about product-led growth, right? And do I have to do PLG and need to have a self-service functionality on the product, or at least somewhere in my sales experience, right? I feel like nowadays almost every company has that, right? It's become standard that every company has at least some sort of interactive demo on the website or in their sales process, or they give you a very easy way to explore the product even before you talk to a salesperson, especially in like more mature organizations that have that are like Series B and upwards. I feel like that's already standard, right? I think companies know that we need to give value to a buyer before they explore anything. I think now what has happened, right, over the last like few years, the amount of vendors that have been building, the amount of teams that have been shipping software in a just faster amount of time, right? I mean, Cursor and like basically every AI coding tool actually just accelerates that, where essentially almost like a designer can also run certain changes, right? Like people that have never actually touched a line of code before can go into Lovable and start creating prototypes and sell, right? And I think it just creates a little bit of a dynamic where the initial like category leaders within each category, they now not just facing a status quo issue in the sales process of, okay, do we even need to switch and basically move from not doing anything to moving to a software? It's more like, okay, I have that problem, but I also have another problem, which is there's like 10 different kind of newcomers that are trying to battle my TAM, and they're trying to go against my total like addressable market. And now I have to find a new way to approach that. I think a lot of chief revenue officers, I mean, looking at the data, right, they're not in their seat for so long, unfortunately, right? I think like oftentimes it's the CROs who lose their jobs pretty quickly, and they fear that if they don't make a fundamental change to their sales organization in terms of how everybody can win more ultimately, then they will lose their job because they're going to be the ones that are kept accountable, right? So I think that's kind of what's changing. It's the market dynamic combined with increased pressure. More and more teams don't hit their quota these days. So I think revenue leaders try to find a new approach. And I actually had this kind of webinar that I did 2 weeks ago where I said we're essentially moving away from PLG to proof-led revenue. Everything has to be built on proof. And if you can deliver proven evidence in the sales process, you'll probably have a lot of difficulties winning your market. And I think that's kind of what's happening. And I think the best organizations out there are already following that principle. And I think it's just going to take a little bit of time until the late adopters are going to follow.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned also product-led growth, right? So PLG, because I had a really interesting conversation with Dave Jackson a few weeks ago, who I think calls himself the CS heretic, and was for the last year someone who quite rightly basically questioned a few things that happened in the CS and customer success community, right? And how the understanding and the revenue responsibility was. That was rightly so. And he kind of pushed that customer-led growth, the CLG topic, right? Where it was all about, okay, let's create a flywheel or a bow tie about, oh no, he even called it a belt, basically putting in customers and then a belt and an arrow out. How to kind of gather more value from a customer base, increase the revenues. So yeah, just shout out to Dave. He was pushing for these topics for many years, and finally we're all listening. So yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, I think I've seen one of his presentations at a Winning by Design conference, I think somewhere. So yeah, he seems to be in that ecosystem as well.
We mentioned one topic a lot already, and I want to dig a bit deeper into it, and that's AI. I think the topic you cannot get away from at the moment, also building software. So from your point of view, what are like a few very important features that a modern solution at the moment has to have, and what are things also, if you look at your customer base, that is absolutely requested by now versus stuff where we still envision more than customers are actually pulling it. So where's the pull and where's more the push?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's two potential perspectives how I see it. I think the first question is talking less about the team building, but more about the company acquiring software. My co-founder was actually at a CIO conference a few months ago by a venture fund here in San Francisco. And what was interesting is that every CIO of like major companies, right? We talk about like Fortune 1000 companies and leading software companies here in the Bay Area. Every CIO said, or like 80% of the CIOs said, they are basically internally building some sort of a value realization program as a buyer, not as a software vendor, right? As a buyer to assess the quality and the delivery of the different software vendors that they have bought software from. And I think it's what it tells us is it's less about just looking at, okay, we have 1,000 licenses and let's see if 1,000 licenses get used, but they actually try to go a level deeper and they try to make assumptions around how is value being captured within our organization from this software, and how does that tell us that we're going to shut down this product, right? Or does it show us that we potentially want to expand? So I think what's the reality is that even if you're not doing it as a vendor, software, like the buyer will actually start to do something there, right? And I think whether they will do it in your product, and that's, I think, a lot of the reaction that happens, Stefan, to coming back to what you said, a lot of product teams, they will probably need to follow that principle. If the buyer does it, you probably try to go ahead, right? And you probably have to build some sort of value realization thinking into your own product. So when a CIO wants to get some analytics and wants to see whether the use case is performing, ideally they go into your product to see that, right? Or they have some sort of kind of access point to assess the quality of the delivery of your product. I think that's one thing. And you see already first product teams are actively thinking about how do we ensure that companies can better measure the value that we provide within our own product. That's one thing that I think becomes, I wouldn't say necessarily a must right now, but it's already trending. I think the other team, and I think it's less about individual features, right? I don't think if you have SSO or if you have an Okta integration or an that's going to be the big thing. But I do see that when in a world where it's just everybody can build stuff, right, on Lovable and like Cursor and kind of many other of those platforms, integrations and like basically setups into your workflow and maybe delivering a little bit of a custom journey at some point, right, can actually be a differentiator if you have a team that can accommodate that, right? So not every I mean, DocuSign had a whole conversation about this where, of course, you can spin up probably a quick e-sign process within a couple minutes with some of those vendors. But what's interesting probably about DocuSign, and of course, I'm picking an example here, but that they have an integration into your Salesforce. They have an integration into your customer success management source, like software, right? They have all these different integrations that make it easier to track, analyze, and derive value from it. Not saying that that's a great example, but I think it shows that just building probably is not enough. And just building the next feature is probably not enough, but rather aligning your product roadmap to the actual value that customers get. And maybe think about, I had this conversation with a senior exec at one of the big software companies, and what he said, which I thought was interesting, you can assess delivery gaps on individual use cases post-sales. And currently, like a product team doesn't actually know whether certain use cases don't perform well, right? They know it somewhat, but like I've been a PM myself, right? I would have loved to have access to value realization data to see whether certain use cases are not performing. And if they're not performing, I can go back to the engineers and say, hey, this use case actually has a massively big potential, but we are under leveraging, and it's because there are a certain functionality missing. So let's go back and think about our next quarter's roadmap based on that principle of driving the delivery and the success of that use case. And I think it's a different conversation, and hopefully it will help product teams be sharper about the features they're building that actually should lead to those outcomes instead of just building something that looks nice and actually doesn't perform.
Yeah, thank you. I really love the perspective about the insights, right? That basically the buying persona is looking for, and then the whole perspective about ecosystem, right? And how do you make sure that you can integrate well and you can be integrated well in order to increase the stickiness. How do you see user behavior changing? Like, I think we all grew up in the good CRUD SaaS world where you just like lightweight UIs, you type data in, you get something out, but it is a lot of clicking of the mouse and there's a lot of typing on the keyboard. How's the user interaction changing with the generation that we're now trained to be more conversational? Do you see that already? Do you have engagement with customers where they ask for more chatbots, or are they more, I don't know, appalled is maybe a bit of a too strong word, but maybe a bit skeptic because everyone's just having a chatbot now?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a little bit of skepticism. I think from a product side, as chatbot doesn't necessarily always need to be the best answer, right? I think for some use cases, yes, but I think chatbot is not as like it needs to be somewhat programmatic sometimes, right? I think the underlying issue that I think as an individual end user of ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, right, of all the different systems, we're kind of used to, hey, we can ask any sort of question and we will get some response back. Of course, some of those responses can be biased or wrong. And I think some of the user expectations nowadays is that if I have a chatbot within a product, I can ask any sort of question, I always get a great answer back. And I mean, technically, of course, Stefan, you probably know this better than anyone else, but of course, technically, the underlying data and how data is being structured remains still very important, right? And I think if the data is very much unstructured, it's not going to necessarily make it easier for a LLM or kind of a chatbot to pick it up and give you the right answer. So I think there's a lot of conversations that are happening in terms of like, is a chatbot really the right interface? Do you potentially just automate the entire workflow and then maybe have a person review it and provide critical thinking? I think that's probably more of the trajectory we're going, just looking at coding probably being at the frontier, right? I just talked to an engineer like 2 hours ago who kind of compared some of the stuff that we're thinking about in terms of, can we automate some of the parts of the business case? But what's the role of the seller then, right? The seller still needs to be referred for the CFO conversation, right? So automating doesn't necessarily mean ignoring, but automating means doing the cumbersome work for them, and then they need to provide critical thinking and a level of understanding to also then understand their core idea of the business case and where the numbers come from. But like finding numbers and inputs, and that's a cumbersome process that a seller doesn't want to do. And I think it's a little similar to coding. Yes, you can like actually use Cursor for a lot of different things these days, right? But it's still an engineer that reviews and like takes a perspective on how it fits into the larger code base, how it accelerates kind of the product, the kind of the velocity. But I think that will not change in other industries, right? I think like when we can augment and when we can automate, it still kind of has a great opportunity for a human to actually be much more of an important role in thinking about the delivery of the kind of that individual kind of product, but also thinking about where like how you can put like necessary critical thinking on it. And I think that's kind of where hopefully it's just becoming more conversational, right? I think we've been clicking too much, and I think it's harming our fingers. So let's just talk more and make that our core assets.
And I think that's what it's about, right? So, and we read a lot about this topic of how the strongest players on your team basically get even better with the support of AI, right? So you read a lot about that, which I think is true. And I think that's especially what you just said, right? That if your sales reps get the right kind of support or the right kind of guidance, right, they can do a much better job, especially if you're in mid-market and up, right? Enterprise sales, you cannot replace that with an agent or with an AI. And still, if you can have the best agent, the best workflow, the best AI, if your sales rep then in the business meeting, in the sales meeting, kind of drops the ball, then it doesn't help you a lot, right? So somebody still needs to deliver it. And maybe staying on that topic of what AI does well and what it might not do well, what are maybe if you have two examples, right, of where you saw AI doing something really, really well, right, where you thought, oh my, brilliant, that's something where it's super useful for the person using it, and where was something where you would say, okay, this is something that AI probably shouldn't be trusted with as of yet?
I think AI can be a great coach, right? Even in like pricing negotiations and sharing context on a deal, where you stand, what you're trying to accomplish in terms of price. Like it can really be a great coach, especially if you know best practices or maybe people to follow that an AI can reference to, right? Maybe pricing leaders that you appreciate, right? And just giving a little bit of reference of how they would potentially solve that problem has worked super well for me in terms of preparing for a pricing conversation with a customer or preparing for a negotiation, right? And I don't think it's going to be kind of the answer to everything, but it definitely has helped me run a better meeting in a negotiation meeting, basically final step of the sales process. So that's been working super well. I think where it doesn't work well yet is it's I mean on almost like more broad questions, right? I think if you pointed to a specific problem to solve, like a pricing problem, great. But if you try to assume that it's going to run your sales process from start to finish and like basically tackling multiple different problems at the same time, and AI currently still struggles, right? And I think there has been experiments in the past where there were people that tried to use AI for an SMB sale and completely automated at this point, and it didn't work as well in terms of conversion rate as I think some of the people expected, because there's still some nuance. And I think it's really thinking about what is the individual workflow that you want to automate, then I think an entire journey, right? And I think the individual workflow can be, hey, I have a pricing conversation, I need help on this, or hey, I need to, for a business case, right, I need to get this input on this kind of industry. Can you gather that input and run an analysis and bring it back? Yes, that's a very like a pointed problem to solve, and that's kind of where it excels at. And maybe at some point that's they can do everything, but I think right now they're just limited to more clear processes. And if it gets broader than that, I do see that it challenges, especially in custom workflows that you build outside of ChatGPT and some of the systems that we all know. Not sure, Stefan, if you have any thoughts on that from a technical side as well, but I'm curious.
I mean, from a technical side, I think the research features are so they are not getting the credit also on the technical side that I would give them, because it becomes so easy to also do the architectural work, something that normally sticks with the engineer. So with deep research, I was able to do some architectural work that I probably wouldn't have been done otherwise, because it just gives you the options, and then you develop it also in a coaching type of environment. So pretty much what you said, and then of course the whole coding agents. It is actually it is frightening how well they can sometimes foresee my thoughts, and how well it is recommending the next line of code, or how good it can actually even produce a full PR. That needs to be reviewed still, of course, but the code generation is amazing. As we've been speaking about your you use and where you also wouldn't use it so much in terms of like fully automating a salesperson. How do you use Minoa yourself internally? Like, do you have a drink your own champagne type of a program, and what is like the most favorite thing that you use in your own software?
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple of different like processes where I love to use it. We actually recently launched the idea of a kind of summary page business case where basically we take a full business case and you can share a quick kind of 1 or 2 pager, attach it as a PDF, like something that usually would take like different kind of processes to bring it together. And actually we take all the different data points about the customer and we help you build a narrative around it that you can share, for example, post a discovery call or post a first demo, right, where you already gather some relevant inputs. And the critical thing is to not lose the momentum, right? And you lose the momentum by equipping the other side to move forward with an internal document that they can use to generate additional awareness around the problem you're trying to solve. That's one thing that I've been kind of just recently enjoyed kind of using. I think more importantly though, and I think it comes back to the conversation we had, the AI can kind of automate some of the input gathering and like help me frame the right use cases and which use case I should bring in. But I think what's enjoyable and something that I almost do for every single deal is that I share my screen, I open the Minoa application and I say, hey, let's mutually own the business case, you and I as a champion, and we kind of mutually define what do we want to basically position here, what's the larger outcome. And it's almost interesting, like people start to come closer to the screen, they start to be involved, they start to be engaged, and they feel ownership about the things that they've been creating. And I think it's almost like a more psychological thing where you kind of move over the responsibility from you to them. That has been really, really exciting to just see. And it's something that I enjoy the most because it drives, it removes a little bit of the distance that I think a lot of sellers can have or fear that, okay, there's a customer, they don't actually want to buy anything, and out and out you convince them. And ultimately it's like, hey, like come to the same table, like explore the amplitude of the problem, and if the problem is big enough, then it's worth investing more time, but like do it together, and otherwise you say goodbye and you leave as friends, right? But I think that's kind of where that process really, really helped me personally in the past.
Yeah, love that. Thank you.
And how do you internally make sure? Do you have like a program internally where you also kind of discuss that oftentimes? Or do you share these business case? Do you share this feedback around that as well? Or how do you make sure that kind of everyone at Minoa also thinks in business case value logic? So is there any approach that you could suggest to other companies which also want to adopt that, right? And to also want to drink your champagne then to kind of adopt that?
Yeah, I think the founder and CEO of one of our customers, Vanta, Christina, who's like pretty well known in like Silicon Valley, like she has often talked about the idea of like AE confidence, and that in like the more confident in like a seller can get, the better they will perform. And it's thinking about how do you scale confidence, right? And I think scaling confidence means that whenever a business case has helped you actually win a deal or has helped you maybe win over that typical no decision blocker within midst of the sales funnel where somebody says, oh, I actually don't know if let's stop here and let's not continue. That's when the business case can come in and can help with that, right? But if that like individual business case is then shared with everybody else and there's a bit of a playbook, it makes every other seller more confident whenever they are presenting it. So I think a lot of the question is, I think, how do you generate more confidence in a sales team? And you can generate more confidence in a sales team by equipping everyone with the same playbook and learn from what the great people are doing within a team, right? If the best people usually are quantifying pain, they are going down the metrics, right? And they're really trying to understand, why are you even changing something now? Why not in 6 months? That principle can be shared and can make other sellers more confident. And I think that's something that Christina, I think, has done an amazing job at like at articulating that idea of like AE confidence and like almost scaling that within a go-to-market team, right? And I think, yeah, I mean the success proves for itself, right? I mean they Sequoia back company just had like $4 or $5 billion in valuation, so I think they've done a good job in the past few years.
Wonderful. And speaking about the adoption piece, maybe moving that over to the customer side. So have you come across prospects, customers you talk to, where there was a lot of hesitance to go into this topic? I could imagine there's companies that do a lot of like volume selling, right? Where there's a lot of like speed in the sales organization and everything is like the next forecast call and the slides are prepared and the beamer is turned on and everybody's just waiting to put the numbers on that thing. And then you come around the corner and say, actually, if you sell with value, right, there might be bigger deals and there might be but a bit more added complexity. So how have you worked around maybe some concerns about changing the sales approach? Because this is for some companies like a holy grail that that's maybe not supposed to be touched.
It's interesting. I talked to one of our customers, and independent of the platform, I ask him what is because what they were basically doing is like they started moving value early in the cycle. So even in the discovery call, they share their screen and they mutually go about the use cases and the outcomes that a customer can deliver. And I asked him, okay, what was the consequence of doing that, right? Like what actually happened? Like how can you measure that quantitatively? And he said, which I thought was amazing, he said they actually had the ability to skip demos in some of those conversations. So a lot of the like thinking about a business case actually slows down the deal and then like prolongs the sales cycle. Yes, there's some value in potentially slowing down a deal sometimes to speed up later. But we also see that when you are having a better mutual understanding, customer and yourself, about the value you're providing early in the funnel, it can actually speed things up because they don't need to see a 45-minute demo. They don't need to do a 4-week POC, right? They don't need to do a pilot because they're already convinced of the value earlier. And that's, I think, where you can speed up things because people are convinced about what you can provide and they don't need to see feature function and every single button in the application to be convinced. And I think that's where the value can actually be an accelerator. And maybe at the beginning it feels like you're slowing things down, but it's an accelerator mid-funnel and towards a potential avoidance of a POC, for example.
All right, wonderful, and I think that's so important, right? So you need to understand how to convince others to also adopt that, right? And we've been in this area long enough to kind of understand that sometimes there's a lot of preaching, convincing, and education around this topic, and that's why it's so important also to have these conversations, not just in your own silo, but kind of spread the word and involve as many people as possible, right? And just this round, I think, right, we all have a bit of we had touch points in the past with probably the sales side, the pre-sales side, the solution consulting side, the customer success side, a product and tech side. So we basically have all the, like I would call competence in the room right now, where we know, okay, if this is spread into organizations, then it makes all our lives a bit easier. And just to cite, funnily enough, Dave Jackson again, just recent. Oh no, sorry, Dave. You got your 15 minutes. Dan Steinman, in one of our recent episodes, he said that the main value preacher in your organization should always kind of be the CEO, right? You should be the one that understands, that preaches and goes into your organization and kind of says, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what we're solving for the customers. And I think if you do that, I think you're already on a good path. And so all the CEOs that are hopefully listening or are the recording is shared with afterwards, listen to us, listen to the value selling approach, listen to customer value approach, and just work on preaching that into your organization.
Be the chief value officer.
Yes, be the chief value officer. Exactly. Perfect. So I would say let's wrap it up probably with one last peek or advice into or for the future. So Max, if you could advise people out there, right, who are who've seen changes in SaaS over the last few years, who've seen changes in the landscape, changes in the way we build companies, how companies are managed, quite a few things have changed. So what would be maybe your advice to prepare for the future, right? With all the AI, with the customer value changes, with everything we're seeing, is there some advice you would give to people to be prepared and provide the most value they can to their organizations?
Good question. I think, I mean, run more experiments, right? I think is like take a couple of sellers in your team, start adopting a bit of a new framework, test it out in the market, give them the freedom to also do it for a month or so, right? Like there's different tactical ways of how you can think about compensation and quota about it. But I think if you truly think that you're in a red ocean market or you see more competition and you don't want to discount every single deal, I would basically take a small group, like 1 or 2 people that you stay close to, right? And as a founder, you might just mentioned, Stephen, a CEO or a founder or an executive is responsible for that, right? And don't just expect that sellers would do it themselves. Jump into those calls with them, do it with them, learn what it takes to kind of change that attitude, and then you can scale it afterwards, right? But I think often there's a disconnect between what the executives think and want and what the field does. But I think there's an easy answer, right? Just join those meetings for like maybe like 4 or 5 times, like learn what it takes, and then you can like gain your own knowledge and expertise to build a playbook around it. And I think that's where just like middle managing and watching and observing will not happen anymore, right? I think that's that time doesn't work, and I think we all have to take a bit more responsibility if we want to change internal culture and behavior.
Wonderful. I think that was a great last sentence. So thank you so much, Max, for joining us today. Thank you, Stefan, also for supporting us. Thanks for everybody who was listening.
I hope Jim makes it the next time.
Otherwise, we'll need you again.
We need you.
No, this was great. I mean, thank you too. This was a really fun conversation. And I mean, you always ask good questions. It was nice to. Of course, it's always better to do it in person, but
next time.
Remote was great too. Yeah, you're always invited to San Francisco, of course.
Yeah, after you came to Berlin, maybe next time we are in San Francisco.
Next time, pizza in San Francisco. Exactly.
That's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All the best. Speak soon. And to everybody out there, we'll be sharing the recording and see you next time with another amazing guest. So have a good evening and speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.